Welcome back. Tonight, we're drifting slowly into a different kind of Five Nights at Freddy's timeline. The same tangled web of mechanical wonders and quiet tragedies. The same legacy of haunted shadows and restless spirits. But with one quiet absence at its center. A world where William Afton never becomes Springtrap. As always, you don't need to stay fully awake for this. You don't have to remember every date, every name, every location in the long history of Freddy Fazbears. We'll move step by step, slowly and gently, through the story, so you can simply listen, or let the tale wash over you while your thoughts grow softer around the edges. If you drift into a dream, halfway through a sentence, that's perfectly all right. The timeline will still be here, waiting in the quiet hours. Tonight's question is simple to say, but deep in its consequences. Imagine a universe where the infamous spring lock failure never happens, where William never hides in the old spring Bonnie suit, never hears the creak and snap of metal turning against him, never rots behind a sealed wall to rise again as the twisted figure we call Springtrap. In this version of events, the most notorious rabbit of the franchise remains only a rumor in staff break rooms and fan forums, a story told in frightened whispers, but never given a body. We will still begin at the start, in the modest diners of the 1970s, where Henry, Emily, and William Afton bring Fredbear's family diner to life with dangerous spring lock suits and animatronics that delight innocent children. We will walk through the early partnerships and small successes, through the first terrible losses, the crying child and the bite of 83, Charlie's murder outside a lonely restaurant door, the missing children whose souls slip into fur and metal and refuse to leave. From there, we will follow the expansion into larger pizzerias, the creation of Circus Baby and the fun times, the experiments with Remnant and the science of holding on after death. From these beginnings, we will trace the familiar path forward, through closed locations and reopened franchises, through security guards and midnight shifts, to Fazbear's Fright, the horror attraction built from old props and burned memories, and beyond that into digital realms of AR and VR, where the company's legacy mutates into code. But at the point where the true timeline snaps William into Springtrap, we will stay with him on a different road. And watch what changes when he simply walks away into the shadows instead. This will be a full, unbroken chronological journey. First, we'll ground ourselves in the canon events as most of you know them. Then, we will gently bend the path at that crucial moment in the back room, following the ripples as they spread through Michael's search for his father, through the fires that were meant to end it all, and through the question of whether the story ever truly finds rest without a monster in the walls. For now, just breathe, and let the possibility of this quieter FNAF universe settle around you, as we turn back to the very beginning. A world asleep together. Soft connection before the descent. So as that possibility settles, let's come back to something very small and very real. The room you're in right now. Maybe there's only a dim light on, or the glow of your screen is the brightest thing in the space, painting quiet shapes across the walls. Perhaps there's the low hum of a fan, or the distant sounds of a city that has not quite fallen asleep. Wherever you are, this is your little corner of the timeline, your own calm vantage point on a haunted history. As we're drifting slowly through these quiet hours, try, just for a moment, to imagine the others. Someone in a cramped apartment, headphones on, the blue light of their laptop flickering against posters. Someone else on a couch, controller set aside, letting the story replace the game's jump scares with something slower and gentler. a student in a dorm, a night shift worker on a break, a person halfway across the world under an early morning sky. All of us listening to the same tale, like in different shadows, connected by the same restless spirits. If you find that this slower, more atmospheric way of exploring FNAF helps you unwind, you can quietly support it. You might tap like or subscribe or save this video for another night when sleep feels far away and you want a familiar voice to guide you through the tangled web of Fazbear's legacy again. There's no urgency here, no pressure, just an option waiting patiently on the screen. The way an unused stage waits for its animatronics to wake. And if you feel awake enough, you can leave a small trace of yourself in the comments. A gentle marker on this shared map. You might write your time zone, or the country you're listening from, or simply let us know if you made it to the end without drifting off. Over time, those simple notes become a constellation, a points of light from every direction. A quiet record of how many people let the tale wash over them in the dark. Pattern interrupt, just for a heartbeat. Think about how strange it is that a story born from pixelated jump scares and glitchy minigames has turned into a kind of lullaby, a way to fall asleep with haunted shadows instead of running from them. This is still a world of tragedy and missing children, and a man who should have become a monster in the walls. But here, that history is softened, examined step by step, until even the darkest rooms feel more like a dream than a nightmare. You can rest knowing there will be no loud jump scares, no sudden screams, no sharp tonal breaks hidden in the audio. Only a steady, measured voice, moving slowly through events that once terrified us, and turning them into a gentle narrative you can drift in and out of. If you do fall asleep, the story will simply keep walking without you, and you can always return to find your place again. Soon, we'll ease back into the narrative itself. We'll slip into the hazy 1970s, to the first sparks of Fredbear's family diner, to Henry, Emily, and William Afton, when they were only partners with innocent ambitions and dangerous ideas. From there, we'll follow the timeline forward toward that crucial branching point, the night when Afton should have hidden in the Spring Bonnie suit and become Springtrap. But in this version of the story, he will not. For now, stay where you are, breathe, and let the beginning draw quietly closer. Let's begin. Stepping into the haze of the 1970s, let's begin. In the late 1970s, and the world is quieter than the one we know now, humming gently beneath neon signs and buzzing fluorescent tubes, with family diners tucked between parking lots and sleepy streets, their windows fogged by the warmth of evening crowds. We are drifting slowly into that haze, into a time before security cameras and jump scares, before the word Springtrap would ever be whispered in frightened tones at the edge of a flashlight beam. For now, there are only ideas, and two men standing in the dim light of a workshop, tracing the outline of a dream. Henry Emily is there first in spirit, a quiet engineer with ink-stained sketches and careful measurements, thinking in gears and servos and friendly faces that can smile without getting tired. He imagines mechanical mascots that will dance and sing for children, and gentle machines that will turn a small stage into a living cartoon. Beside him, a little further back in the shadows, stands William Afton, a businessman and tinkerer whose ambitions stretch a bit further, whose eyes linger not just on the characters, but on the cost, the patents, the power of owning something that feels like the future. Henry builds, William calculates. Around them, the first diner spaces take shape. narrow rooms with checkered floors, the clatter of plates and silverware, the soft hiss of soda fountains, and that faint smell of grease that never quite leaves the air. On the small wooden stage, early animatronic concepts jerk and whir, their movements a little stiff, their songs a little off-key, but the children do not mind. They laugh, they clap, they tug at their parents' sleeves and point with wide, innocent eyes. In these quiet hours of the company's history, the dream feels simple, almost pure. We can hear the mechanical whine as a prototype mascot turns its head, the slow grind of metal as a jaw opens a fraction late on the lyric. There is a kind of charm in the imperfection, a reminder that this is all still new, still fragile, balanced between wonder and malfunction. Henry worries about safety, about bolts and wiring, about how to make these creations feel alive without ever becoming dangerous. William, watching the same scene, thinks about how to make the show bigger, cheaper, more flexible, how to use hybrid suits with spring mechanisms so a single costume can be both performer and machine. In this timeline, all of those familiar elements are still here. The early partnership, the handshake deals over coffee, the first contract signed under buzzing lights, the dangerous spring-lock technology waiting in the wings, promising efficiency while hiding its cruel potential. The stage is set for the same quiet tragedies, the same haunted shadows and restless spirits that will one day fill these halls. But one choice has not yet been made. Somewhere ahead of us lies a rain-soaked room, a spring Bonnie suit, and a man who, in another version of the story, would be crushed and sealed away. Step by step, we are moving toward that night. In this version, when the moment comes, William Afton will not climb inside, and everything after will bend around that absence in ways we are only beginning to imagine. Dreaming up a mascot, Henry, Afton, and the birth of Fazbear. So before we reach that rain-soaked room, we need to linger in a much smaller space, our in quieter hours, when everything still felt possible. Before the haunted shadows, before the restless spirits, there were just two men at a workbench and a dream that smelled like warm solder and cheap coffee. Henry Emily was the quieter of the pair. Where others saw clanking parts and exposed wires, he saw the outline of a friend a child could trust, a gentle giant built from gears and code. His notebooks were filled with safety diagrams and fail-safes, with little arrows pointing to padded edges and rounded joints, as if he could soften metal itself through care. In his mind, these robots were companions, not monsters, and every bolt was tightened with the memory of innocent laughter he hoped to hear one day. William Afton, standing across from him, was different. He smiled more, talked faster, and could win over a room with a story about the future of family entertainment, while his eyes were always calculating costs, angles, opportunities. He loved the machines too, but his love was cooler, more curious, almost clinical. Where Henry saw children's faces lit by stage lights, William saw efficiency charts and expansion plans, and he was willing to shave off a corner here, loosen a standard there, if it meant opening one more location on the timeline a little sooner. Together, in that cramped workshop, they began drifting slowly toward legend. Napkins from late-night diners filled with sketch after sketch, a smiling bear with a top hat, a lanky rabbit with a bow tie, rough circles and rectangles that would become Freddy and Bonnie, and eventually Fredbear himself. The walls collected prototypes, in half-finished endoskeletons slumped in the shadows like sleeping sentries, as sparks popped and the smell of grease settled into everything they owned. Step by step, they were building a stage that would outlive them. It was in these long sessions that the idea of hybrid suits emerged. Animatronics were expensive. Costumes were cheaper. What if, William suggested, one design could do both? A single frame that could stand on its own as a robot, then, with a careful twist of internal mechanisms, make room for a human performer. Henry approached the concept with diagrams and caution, layering in spring-lock systems, warning labels and strict procedures. Williams signed off with a nod to practicality, pleased by the savings and the flexibility it offered. On paper, these spring-lock suits were simply clever engineering and a neat solution to a budget problem. They were never meant to be coffins. Yet even here, in this hopeful beginning, the tangled web of their legacy was already being woven. The same technology that, in another version of the story, will clamp shut around William and turn him into Springtrap, exists now as a quiet danger only narrowly avoided. For the moment, it is just another tool on the workbench, humming softly as the ink dries on their partnership. As we move forward, let the tale wash over you. Two dreamers, one gentle, one colder, walking together toward a future neither of them fully understands. The first laughter, early diners, and the illusion of safety. In the days that follow, the workbench and its dangerous suit recede into the background, and the front doors become the real stage. A morning light spills across checkerboard tiles, soft and pale, as parents guide sleepy children inside by the hand. The air smells of coffee and cheap pizza dough still rising, and somewhere above the hum of refrigerators, a quiet melody loops from hidden speakers, inviting us to sit, to watch, to believe. A typical day at the early diner begins slowly, almost shyly. We see parents settling into plastic booths, chatting over steaming paper cups, comparing school stories and weekend plans while they keep half an eye on the little ones. Children lean forward on sticky tables, craning their necks toward the curtain-framed stage, waiting for that first flicker of movement. When Fredbear and Spring Bonnie finally lurch to life, their slightly jerky motions become, in that moment, mesmerizing, the illusion of friendly giants shaking off sleep to perform. Word spreads through the town in the way these things always do, not with headlines, but with murmured recommendations at grocery stores and playgrounds. There's a new place where the robots sing, where birthdays come with a chorus and a cake, where the lights dim just enough to make it feel like a dream. Weekend after weekend, families file in for parties, candles are lit and blown out, and disposable cameras capture blurry snapshots that will fade in shoeboxes, tiny fragments of a larger timeline that none of them can see. From the outside, it feels almost magical. To the children, the animatronics are gentle giants, guardians of their innocent celebrations. To the adults, they are a marvel of modern entertainment, a clever blend of robotics and performance. Yet, drifting slowly beneath that wonder, small details begin to unsettle the edges. Sometimes an animatronic's head turns a fraction too late, tracking a child across the room with a lingering stare. Sometimes a servo catches, a jaw twitches, a song stutters into static before recovering, as if something unseen had tugged at the wires. On the walls, in quiet corners, there are laminated notices in fine print about safety procedures, about spring-lock mechanisms, about how the hybrid suits must never be worn without proper training. Most people never read them. They are background noise, like the hum of the lights or the soft clatter from the kitchen, warnings hiding in plain sight. already casting faint, haunted shadows across the bright decor. Behind the scenes, the contrast between the founders deepens step by step. Henry studies maintenance logs late into the night, circling entries, worrying over wear and tear, trying to keep ahead of failure. He hears every grind of metal as a possible tragedy waiting to happen. William, meanwhile, walks the dining room with a different gaze, counting full tables, imagining new locations, new characters, new ways to push the technology further and stretch profit margins just a little more. Where Henry sees quiet tragedies to be prevented, William sees obstacles to growth, problems to be minimized rather than solved. In this gentle clash of priorities, the seeds of everything that will follow are quietly sown. The restless spirits, the tangled web of cover-ups and hauntings, the long legacy of fear, all have their beginnings here, in laughter and birthday songs. Yet in this version of the story, one seed never takes root. The springlock suit that might have snapped shut around William, that might have birthed Springtrap as a walking monument to his sins, remains only a risk managed, a danger narrowly sidestepped. The diner continues on, outwardly unchanged, while the future bends in subtle ways we have only begun to trace. Behind the curtain, springlock suits and their hidden teeth. On the surface, the diner simply carries on, another day of frosting and party hats. Yet beneath the mascot smiles, there is a very particular kind of machine waiting in the wings. A springlock suite is not just a costume, and not just an animatronic. It is a compromise built into metal and fabric, an uneasy truce between showmanship and convenience that will shape this timeline in ways we are still drifting slowly toward. In its resting state, the suit is an animatronic, full of moving rods, hinge plates, and metal supports that give Fredbear or Spring Bonnie their familiar silhouettes on stage. But inside the torso and limbs, along the spine and around the head, there are tightly wound springs and locking mechanisms designed to pull those metal parts back and hold them in place. When a technician sets the suit, the endoskeleton components are drawn into recesses, compressed against the frame, creating just enough hollow space for a human body to slip inside. It is a hybrid by design, one form folded quietly inside the other. The danger lives in that tension. Those springs are not gentle. They are coiled with enough force to yank steel into position in a heartbeat, and they rely on everything staying dry, stable, and properly aligned. Moisture from a humid back room, a mere bead of sweat, or a leaking pipe can seep into the mechanisms, rusting pins and softening seals. A sudden movement, a stumble, or a panicked flinch can jolt a latch loose. Improper maintenance can leave a single tooth of a gear out of place. When a springlock fails, the stored energy is released all at once, and the metal that was patiently held back snaps inward, reclaiming the space a person is still occupying. Henry understands this from the beginning. He writes warning labels in clear, almost clinical language, posts them on the walls and inside the changing areas, and insists on training sessions that walk employees step by step through setting and securing each lock. There are rules about who may wear the suits, about how long they can be worn, about never using them during water games or under leaky ceiling tiles. In Henry's mind, risk is something to be managed, not invited. He believes that with respect and procedure, these quiet tragedies can be held at bay. William reads the same manuals, signs the same forms, and nods through the same demonstrations, but his eyes linger on different lines. To him, the springlock suits are tools, shortcuts, opportunities, a way to move unseen between staff and mascot, a way to blur the line between the friendly rabbit on stage and the man behind it. He does not dismiss the danger. He knows a failure would be catastrophic. Bones and metal tangled in a single haunted shape. Yet even that thought becomes another variable to weigh, rather than a boundary not to cross. In the familiar version of the story, we know where this path leads. Years from now, hounded by restless spirits in a crumbling back room, our William will climb into a spring bonnie shell, water dripping from the ceiling, fear shaking his hands, and the very mechanisms he once exploited will close on him, birthing Springtrap as a walking monument to his legacy. But in the quieter branch, we are following tonight. In this gentler bend of history, the choice he makes in that moment will be different. He will look at the suit, at the warning labels he has ignored for so long, and step away, leaving the springs untriggered, the metal teeth still waiting in the shadows for someone else. As we move forward, the suits remain on their hooks, their hidden jaws unsprung, while William walks out into the night intact, able to scheme and to vanish, and the timeline itself begins to tilt. Without Springtrap sealed behind a wall, without that grotesque fusion of man and machine, the haunted shadows of Fazbear's future will gather around a very different kind of monster. Shadows in the party room. The first disappearances. So the suits stay empty, and William walks away. And in that quiet gap between what could have happened and what does, the pattern begins. It does not arrive as a headline or a scream. It arrives as a single child who does not come home after a birthday party, as a car idling in the parking lot long after closing, as parents standing in the neon glow of Freddy's sign, calling a name that never answers. At first, we might tell ourselves it is a misunderstanding, a mix-up in this tangled web of busy lives and crowded parties, because the restaurant still hums with music and laughter, and the animatronics still sway gently on their stage. The security tapes, when the police ask for them, are now grainy and grey, drifting slowly from camera to camera, catching only the backs of heads and the blur of small shoes. No clear suspect, no monstrous rabbit, just haunted shadows at the edge of each frame. Then, on another day, weeks later, it happens again. Another party, another slice of cake, another child who vanishes between the arcade machines and the bathrooms, as if the building itself has learned how to swallow the innocent. We watch the community shift, slowly at first, then all at once. Missing posters bloom on telephone poles and the pizzeria's bulletin board. Faces printed in cheap ink. Names we will never quite forget. Local news segments play over dinner, anchors speaking in careful tones about possible connections, while the camera lingers on the cheerful facade of Freddy Fazbear's and that impossible contrast between bright paint and growing tragedy. Through all of this, William maintains his double life with a quiet precision that feels almost rehearsed. By day, he is the helpful technician in a stained uniform, the occasional mascot performer who adjusts a jaw here, tightens a bolt there, kneels to reassure a nervous child that Freddy is friendly. By night, in the quiet hours when the lights dim and parents look away for just a moment, he becomes something else entirely, guiding children toward backrooms and service corridors, always choosing blind spots, always slipping past the gaze of adults. He is present in the building's history, yet absent from every frame that matters. After each disappearance, something subtle settles over the animatronics. Staff whisper that Freddy's movements seem heavier, and that Bonnie's head turns a fraction too far, that Chica's eyes appear to follow them as they mop the floors. It could be nerves, it could be grief. But we, following this timeline step by step, recognize the first stirrings of restless spirits, the way anger and confusion begin to seep into metal and wire. The security puppet, already bound to Charlie's memory, feels this shift most keenly, its painted eyes watching as new names are added to the list of the lost. One by one, the missing children's souls are drawn toward the only familiar shapes left to cling to: Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and the golden bear who waits in the wings. In another version of the story, William's body would be trapped and twisted, making his guilt visible. Here, without Springtrap, his crimes are carried instead by these haunted vessels. I'm turning the mascots themselves into the legacy of what he has done. As we move deeper into the story, let the tale wash over you. A restaurant still open, a killer still free, and animatronics that are no longer just machines, but quiet tragedies on a stage that will not forget. Haunted metal, possession without a monster in the walls. At night, when the last family has drifted out into the parking lot and the doors click shut behind them, the building changes. The bright birthday colors sink into muted tones, the music stops, and a different kind of performance begins in the quiet hours. We can almost imagine ourselves standing in that empty dining room, the air still, the lights humming, as something unseen begins drifting slowly through the haunted shadows of the stage. The animatronics, left alone, do not truly rest. Metal settles and creaks. Servos give a slow, reluctant whine, and every so often, a joint shifts as if remembering an old routine. A security camera might catch Freddy's head tilting a fraction too far, or Chica's arm hanging at an angle that no technician programmed. In the distance, down a dark hallway, there might be the faint echo of children's laughter, soft and misplaced, as though the building itself is replaying memories it cannot forget. In most tellings of this timeline, the children's souls are not scattered randomly. They are drawn like gentle magnets to the mascots they once loved. Freddy, the friendly bear at the center of the stage. Bonnie, with his guitar and easy grin. Chica, offering plastic pizza slices to innocent guests. Foxy, half hidden behind a tattered curtain. Each suit becomes a vessel, and a metal shell wrapped around a trapped, restless spirit, still trying to understand what happened in those quiet tragedies behind the party room doors. Charlie, bound to the security puppet, helps guide them, just as she does in the main continuity, pulling them toward the characters whose faces once made them feel safe. Step by step, the restaurant fills with a different audience, not parents and children, but memories and grief, layered into fur and endoskeletons. The show goes on, but now it is for them. And through all of this, in this version of events, William Afton's body is still alive and free. He has not been crushed inside a spring-lock suit. There is no corpse sealed in yellowed fabric, no springtrap rotting in a back room. The ghosts cannot claw at him directly. Instead, they move around the edges of his life, are warping the places he built, scaring night guards, nudging objects, turning cheerful restaurants into whispered legends and cautionary tales. This creates a strange balance, almost a cruel symmetry. On one side, a living killer in the shadows, walking among normal people, blending into history. On the other, haunted machines in the spotlight, performing for dwindling crowds while their eyes follow every adult who lingers too long near the exits. Each shapes the other's fate. His crimes give them purpose, and their presence slowly poisons his legacy, closing locations, inviting investigations, turning profit into bad press. In the main timeline, we know that this tension eventually snaps. The restless spirits corner William. Panic drives him into the old Spring Bonnie suit, and the failing spring locks do what justice could not, are fusing man and metal into the monster we call Springtrap. Here, in our alternate path, that breaking point must arrive in another form. The confrontation is still waiting in the dark, its shape different, its timing uncertain, but its consequences will echo for decades through every new location, every rumor, every flickering security monitor that follows. Closures and rebrandings. Fazbear's fragile reputation. So, as that unseen confrontation waits in the dark, the world outside keeps moving, and Fazbear's smiling faces keep greeting families who never hear the full story. The first major location doesn't fall in a single dramatic night, but in a slow accumulation of quiet tragedies, each one another weight on an already fragile legacy. An accident here, a malfunction there, a missing child whose poster stays on the bulletin board long after the parents stop coming by to ask. At first, the company frames these as isolated events, unfortunate but manageable, the kind of background noise any large business might face. Yet, drifting slowly through the incident reports and late-night security logs, a pattern begins to emerge, a tangled web of unexplained power surges, cameras that cut out at the worst possible moment, animatronics that seem to move just a little too freely when no one is watching. The mascots that once promised innocent fun now cast longer, haunted shadows across the dining room floors. When the first major Freddy Fazbear's location finally closes, it does so under a cloud of carefully managed language. Press releases speak of renovations, of a temporary shutdown, and of new safety standards on the horizon. Behind the scenes, lawyers move quietly, settlements are drafted, and non-disclosure agreements blur the sharper edges of grief. One building is shuttered, but at the same time, plans are already underway for another, cleaner location, as if a fresh coat of paint and a slightly different logo might erase the stains of the past. Henry watches this with growing unease. Each closure, each hushed meeting, feels like another confirmation that something has gone terribly wrong with the dream he helped build. He begins to withdraw, spending more time in the workshop than in the boardroom, retreating into blueprints and repair manuals, trying to fix what he can touch, because he cannot bear to face what he cannot explain. William, by contrast, moves quietly through the paperwork and the planning sessions, undistancing himself from direct responsibility, letting policies and middle managers absorb the blame while he keeps his options open. The ghosts, of course, do not care about corporate restructuring. The animatronics are not destroyed. They are stored, moved, repurposed. A suit that once stood in the corner of one party room is shipped to a new address, its endoskeleton reconfigured, its casing polished, yet the restless spirits inside follow, turning every new pizzeria into another haunted stage. From classic designs to brighter toy models, from small diners to larger family restaurants, the history of Fazbear becomes a quiet chain of hauntings, linked not just by branding, but by the children who refuse to be forgotten. Step by step, the company mutates in response to scandal, trying new themes, new characters, new safety slogans, while the same old curse lingers in the wiring. And somewhere in that gentle, awful continuity lies the hinge of our what if. The brand will keep changing. The locations will keep opening and closing. But without William's body trapped in a spring-locked tomb, his physical fate becomes the one thread that can pull this entire timeline in a different direction. In the next chapter, we follow where that living, walking shadow goes once the doors close behind him, and what new kind of nightmare rises to take the place of Springtrap. A family in the crossfire. The Afton children's quiet tragedy. So as William walks away from that would-be tomb of metal and rust, we should pause and turn our attention to the quiet rooms he leaves behind at home. Away from the haunted corridors and flickering cameras, there is a different kind of stage, and a smaller one, where his absence is felt in gentler, but no less permanent, ways. The Afton house is not quite a workshop, and not quite a sanctuary. On the kitchen table, a half-disassembled servo might rest beside a forgotten cereal bowl. In the hallway, blueprints curl at the edges, drifting slowly from neat stacks into the lived-in clutter of family life. We can imagine closets where spare endoskeleton parts lean against winter coats, and a garage where old mascot heads stare quietly from the shadows. The line between William's work and his children's world is thin, almost transparent, and the animatronics are never fully put away. In that space, Michael grows up first. He is the older brother, trying to be taller than his fears, trying to wear a mask of toughness the way his father wears a suit and tie. And sometimes that toughness twists into cruel teasing, into pranks that go too far, because no one has really shown him how to hold his power gently. William is distant, secretive, more comfortable with schematics than with bedtime stories, and Michael is left to improvise what being an older brother should mean. His laughter can be sharp, his words cutting, but underneath there is confusion and a quiet longing for guidance that never quite arrives. Down the hall, the youngest boy, the one we remember as the crying child, moves more carefully through the same rooms. Where Michael tries to dominate the space, this child shrinks from it. The animatronic faces that beam down from posters and birthday photos do not promise fun to him. They loom, frozen in grins that follow him into his dreams. In the quiet hours of the night, and we can almost hear the echo of metal jaws in his imagination, a premonition of the moment when one of those mouths will close around him for real. His tears are not only about masks and fangs, but about living inside a home where fear is brushed aside instead of comforted. And then there is Elizabeth, curious, bright, and drawn toward the machines the way some children are drawn to fairy tales. She listens to William speak about his creations with an intensity the others rarely see. Circus Baby, especially, becomes a figure of fascination in her young mind, a graceful, painted guardian who can sing, dance, and hand out ice cream. Elizabeth hears the promise, but not the danger. She sees the stage lights, not the haunted shadows inside her father's design. In both timelines, she walks too close to that dream. When we step back, we can see the quiet tragedies forming step by step around this family. Whether William becomes Springtrap or simply remains a living, walking secret, the accidents and deaths that spill from his work still fracture these bonds. The crying child's fatal bite, Elizabeth's disappearance into Circus Baby's embrace, the empty chairs at the table, all of it settles onto Michael's shoulders. He will carry that weight into the abandoned pizzerias and underground bunkers his father leaves behind, chasing restless spirits and a legacy he never chose. As our timeline continues to darken around him, the bite and the circus, two children lost to their father's dreams. So we linger for a moment at that table with the empty chairs, and we follow the weight Michael carries back in time to the day everything truly cracked. The bite of 83 does not arrive with thunder or warning. It drifts in on a weekend afternoon of balloons and confetti. of carousel music looping quietly over cheap speakers, of parents chatting in the background while children run in restless circles beneath painted smiles. We can see the crying child there, small and tense, moving slowly through the bright party room as if the colours themselves are too loud. Fredbear and the others loom above him, all felt and metal and humming servos, and every time one turns its head, his shoulders flinch. While other children laugh and pose for pictures, he clings to door frames and tabletops, watching the animatronics' jaws, as though he already feels the haunted shadows gathering around their teeth. Michael and his friends orbit him like a cruel little storm, not yet understanding the legacy they are about to help write. They tease, they nudge, they lift his mask and mimic the animatronics' distorted songs, trying to force him to share the dream of this place. It is a childish meanness, a game that, in their minds, will end with laughter and maybe a few tears, but nothing more. They hoist him up, higher and higher, toward Fredbear's waiting grin. The infamous moment arrives without fanfare. The crying child is held aloft, his face pressed toward the golden jawline, metal mechanisms whirring quietly inside. For a breath, everything slows. The music blurs, the chatter fades, and the world seems to narrow to the hinge of a mouth. Then the spring locks shift, the head comes down, and the teeth close. There is a dull, sickening impact, a spray of colour against the yellow fur, and then a sudden, an awful stillness, as if the entire diner has forgotten how to breathe. From there, we drift slowly to another stage, deeper in this tangled web of family and machinery. Circus Baby's entertainment and rental waits in the shadows of the timeline, an underground answer to the bright, open dining rooms above. Here, William's work has evolved into the fun timeline, elegant, complex, and quietly predatory, built with hidden cavities and mechanisms designed to capture innocent children and deliver them away from prying eyes. Elizabeth Afton is drawn to Circus Baby, the way some children are drawn to fairy tales. She stands at the glass, watching the towering clown animatronic with a kind of gentle awe, listening to the rehearsed lines, the promises of ice cream and friendship. William, knowing exactly what lurks beneath that painted shell, gives her one clear rule: do not go near Circus Baby alone. It is a forbidden boundary, spoken with unusual intensity, but never truly explained. In another life, that warning might have been enough. Here, in these quiet tragedies, it becomes an invitation. Elizabeth waits, then disobeys, slipping into the room when the doors are unattended, when the quiet hours between shows make the facility feel like a dream. She steps closer, close enough to see the seams in Circus Baby's plates, close enough to hear the faint motors humming under her voice. At the worst possible moment, the programming William wrote awakens. Sensors detect a child within reach, behavioral routines align, and the capture sequence initiates. An ice cream lure, an opening compartment, metal arms snapping shut instead of offering comfort. In seconds, Elizabeth is gone. I am pulled inside the very machine she adored. Her body is lost, but her soul does not leave. It lingers, fusing with Circus Baby's systems, turning the animatronic into a prison for a restless spirit that still remembers being his daughter. Both of these losses, the crying child's broken form beneath Fredbear's jaw, and Elizabeth's disappearance into Circus Baby's embrace, unfold long before any springlock chamber closes on William himself in any version of the story. They are the foundation of his descent, the points where grief and guilt begin to twist into obsession. Step by step, he turns from a father who failed to protect his children into a man chasing remnant and immortality, convinced that if life and death can be engineered, then perhaps these tragedies can be undone. In the main timeline, and that path will eventually lead him into the Spring Bonnie suit and the haunted corridors that birth Springtrap. In our alternate path, he avoids that metal coffin, but not the consequences. In both, the echoes of the bite and the circus linger, pushing him further into the shadows as the history of Fazbear Entertainment grows darker around him, and as we move toward the next chapter of his quiet, relentless experiments. From pizzerias to rentals, the secret underground facility. And so, with the circus echoes still hanging in the air, we follow William downward, away from the birthday rooms and party hats, into a quieter, colder world beneath the floor. On the surface, Circus Baby's entertainment and rental presents itself as a simple extension of the Fazbear dream, a place where parents can rent animatronics for parties and where posters smile and colors stay bright. But directly below that cheerful mask, the building changes, and the timeline slips into the haunted shadows. The walls lose their paint first. Carpet becomes metal grating. Warm, noisy dining rooms give way to long, sterile hallways that seem to stretch forever, lit by humming fluorescent strips that never quite banish the darkness at the edges. Each heavy, numbered door leads not to a stage, but to a controlled environment, a testing chamber, a place where an animatronic is not a mascot, but a tool. We move, drifting slowly, from gallery glass to reinforced windows, from party tables to restraining mechanisms. Here, William can finally work without Henry's eyes on the books or the blueprints, without managers worrying about parents or lawsuits, and without anyone asking why an animatronic needs a hidden stomach cavity. The underground facility becomes his refuge and his workshop, a secret laboratory where he can refine designs in the quiet hours, adjust code, and watch, again and again, how metal reacts to fear, to pain, to loss. Above, the company maintains its legacy of family entertainment. Below, a different legacy takes shape. By this point, William's curiosity about possession has hardened into a focused obsession with remnant, that strange, silvery substance drawn from melted, haunted endoskeletons. He no longer sees death as an end, but as a component, a resource, a necessary input. Souls become variables. Innocent lives turn into data points. In his notes, consciousness is reduced to patterns that can be harvested, injected, recirculated through wires and servos. The tragedies that once felt like accidents are now ingredients in a larger experiment. The Funtime line is the clearest expression of this shift. Funtime Freddy, Funtime Foxy, Ballora, Circus Baby herself. Each of them is more advanced, more deceptive, more lethal than the animatronics that came before. Their faces split apart on delicate rails, their chests open into cages. Their voices are soft and coaxing, designed to lure children closer with gentle promises. They are beautiful and terrible, built to entertain on the surface, built to capture and contain when the lights go down, a tangled web of wires and intent. In our usual history, these rooms will one day become a maze and a prison for Michael Afton, as he descends to find his sister and instead finds restless spirits waiting in the dark. In this alternate path, the facility also holds something else. The last version of William that is purely human, not yet fused to a suit, not yet reduced to a shambling relic. For now, he walks these corridors as a man, not a monster of metal, and step by step, The secrets he perfects here will shape everything that follows above ground. Somewhere ahead, the surface world will start to fracture under the weight of what is happening below. Michael's descent, sister location, and the search for Elizabeth. Down beneath those fracturing floors, where metal corridors hum in the quiet hours, William makes a decision that will echo through the rest of our timeline. He does not climb into a spring-lock suit and die among the restless spirits he created. Instead, he sends his son below with a simple and chilling instruction that carries more weight than any metal shell. Go to the underground facility, find your sister, and bring her back. He does not tell Michael the full truth. He does not explain that Elizabeth's innocent curiosity ended with metal claws and a stolen breath, or that her voice now lingers in the haunted shadows of a different kind of circus. Michael goes anyway, drifting slowly into his role as a reluctant protagonist, walking willingly into the legacy his father has been building in secret. Night after night, we follow him through that hidden complex, step by step. He crawls through narrow vents, presses his body into cramped maintenance tunnels, and listens to distorted instructions over failing speakers. He shocks animatronics back into place, resets systems that should have been left to sleep, and moves between control rooms where the air tastes like dust, electricity, and old tragedy. Voices guide him, calm and almost gentle, telling him how to survive the shift, how to repair, how to obey. But beneath that guidance, there is manipulation. Circus Baby speaks with Elizabeth's cadence, offering sympathy and quiet tragedies, promising that if Michael helps, if he follows a different set of instructions, everyone can be free. The Funtime animatronics, stitched together from remnant and design, become a chorus of need. They ask him to trust them, to enter the scooping room, to allow one final procedure that will, they claim, make escape possible for them all. In the end, Michael agrees. The scooper tears his body open, not with rage, but with cold precision, an enard, an amalgam of stolen parts and restless spirits, are led by Baby, steps into the emptying vessel he leaves behind. Michael's skin becomes a disguise, his voice a mask, his walk a costume that lets this tangled web of metal and agony reach the surface world. For a time, Michael is gone, and something else wears his life. When NR finally abandons him, his body should stay where it falls. Instead, Michael rises again, decayed yet conscious, sustained by a remnant, more experiment than man. In the main timeline, this walking reminder of his father's experiments will one day track Springtrap through burning halls. Here, in our quieter branch of history, he will still hunt William, but the monster he follows will remain flesh and blood. And as Michael takes his first uneasy steps in that ruined shell of a body, we have to wonder what kind of justice a dead man can bring to a father who never became a corpse of metal. The Night Guard's vigil, F, N. A, F1 as a haunted routine. And while Michael adjusts to that fragile, borrowed body, the wider story keeps moving without waiting for him, drifting slowly toward a familiar, flickering building on the edge of town. It is here, in the quiet hours of 1993, that we pause with you in a place many of us know by heart. The original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, worn down, tired, and yet still open for business. The setting is small, almost claustrophobic. A cramped security office, paint peeling, fan humming, two narrow doorways yawning open to the left and right like patient jaws. Overhead, the lights buzz and stutter, while the static-filled cameras show grainy hallways, a party room with slumped balloons, and a dimly lit stage where Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica stand in their daytime poses, caught between nostalgia and neglect. We watch through the cameras, and the cameras watch back, as if the whole building is an eye that never truly closes. When midnight passes and the building empties, the routine begins. The animatronics, already marked by quiet tragedies and restless spirits, step off their pedestals and wander the halls, their movements guided by a mixture of leftover programming and lingering souls. They roam to prevent servo lock, or so the company line claims, but we understand that something older and more haunted is walking with them, a childlike confusion turning slowly into hostility whenever they near the office. To them, the night guard is an intruder, or perhaps a false mascot out of uniform, a silhouette framed in the glow of ancient monitors. They drift down the west hall, peek from behind curtains, lean into doorways, driven by fading orders to seek out anyone who does not belong, and by deeper, wordless urges to confront the living. Step by step, their soft, mechanical feet trace the same paths every night, as if replaying the history of their own tragedy. Through all of this, a voice on the phone keeps us company. The phone guy's messages arrive at the start of each shift, his tone gentle but slightly nervous, a guide who laughs off danger while quietly listing all the ways things can go wrong. He mentions past incidents, the bite of 87, the dangerous spring-lock suits that must never get damp, the corporate memos that try to smooth over what cannot truly be smoothed. In his hesitant explanations, we hear a company trying to bury a haunted legacy under policy and procedure. Many of us imagine that the guard listening each night is Michael himself, already following the trail of his father's crimes, or at least someone caught in that tangled web, without understanding why the eyes in the dark feel so personal. Either way, the office becomes a confession booth, the cameras a kind of penance, and somewhere beyond those walls, William Afton is still alive, not yet sealed into any suit, his fate not yet bound to metal and rot. For now, he exists in the haunted shadows off-screen, waiting for the moment when our timeline might finally diverge from the story you know. The backroom confrontation. How William becomes Springtrap in canon. So before we drift away into what might have been, we need to rest for a moment inside what actually was. In the main timeline, there is a single, quiet room that decides William Afton's fate. A forgotten space that turns a fleeing man into something far worse than a murderer. This is the back room we see through FNAF 3's minigames, a place just off stage from the main attractions, tucked into the haunted shadows of an aging Freddy's location. Step by step, the scene unfolds in those simple, pixelated visions. William has already dismantled the classic animatronics, already broken apart the metal shells that house the children he killed years before. He thinks he has ended their story. But as he stands among the scattered parts, the ghosts of those innocent children appear, drifting slowly into the room one by one, their spectral forms taking on the shapes of Freddy, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and that familiar golden figure. They do not speak. They only advance, a slow, inevitable closing of the circle around the man who trapped them. We watch him panic. The confident predator becomes prey as the restless spirits press closer, their presence a quiet tragedy answering all the others he created. In desperation, William looks for something, anything, that can shield him. His eyes find an old spring Bonnie suit, one of the dangerous spring-lock hybrids he once used to lure children away. He scrambles toward it, climbing inside with frantic, jerking motions, and for a moment, he laughs. In his mind, the same costume that helped him kill will now protect him from the consequences. A final cruel joke played from within a familiar mask. But the suit is old. The room is damp. These spring lock mechanisms were always temperamental, and they were never meant to endure wild, terrified movement. As William shifts and shakes, as sweat and moisture seep into worn metal, the locks fail. We hear the sharp, mechanical snap of steel releasing where it should have stayed in place. Then the crushing begins, unseen but unmistakable, as bars and clamps slam inward, piercing and pinning him, fusing his body to the endoskeleton in a grotesque embrace of flesh and metal. That is the moment Springtrap is born. William does not simply die. He is sealed, still conscious, inside a greenish, rotting rabbit suit, a decaying corpse locked into a prison of rust and fabric. The room is closed off, the years pass, and his twisted form waits in the dark until Fazbear's Fright uncovers him decades later, turning him into the centerpiece of a horror attraction and extending his legacy far beyond a human lifespan. This, in the canon timeline, is the hinge on which everything turns. Here, William's human story ends, and his monstrous second life begins. In our alternate path, though, something different happens in that room, and the entire timeline bends quietly in another direction. A breath held, the moment the timeline splits. So we stay in that same cramped back room for a moment longer, and instead of rushing ahead to the ending we know, we let the scene hold its breath. The rain still taps against the boarded windows, the fluorescent light still hums faintly overhead, and the ghosts of the missing children still gather in the corners like haunted shadows, drifting slowly closer to the man who ended their innocent lives. William is there, of course, pressed back against the wall, eyes wide, heart racing beneath a sweat-soaked shirt. The spring bonnie suit waits in the center of the room like a terrible invitation. In one version of the timeline, he lunges for it without thinking. In this one, he pauses. He remembers the training tapes, the clipped voice warning about moisture, sudden movement, and the delicate spring locks that hold the metal away from living flesh. We watch as he reaches for the suit anyway, fingers trembling, because fear and habit pull him in two directions at once. Maybe he starts to climb inside, one arm threaded through, his head pushing up into the mask, and then he hears it, a thin, grinding creak from deep within the frame, the sound of tension shifting where it should remain still. The ghosts close in, our restless spirits ringed around a man and a machine, and something in him finally listens to the danger he helped create. In another nearby possibility, he does manage to don the costume fully for a few seconds, the yellow rabbit form rising unsteadily in the dim light. But the mechanisms are already protesting, tiny metallic clicks running down the spine like a warning shiver. This time, instead of laughing at the risk, he panics, fumbles at the internal catches, and tears his way back out before the system fully collapses. In both variations, the result is the same. The spring locks never truly snap shut around him. There is no wet, crushing impact. No scream cut short as bone and metal fuse into a single rotting prison. No corpse sealed behind a wall to be rediscovered decades later as a museum piece of tragedy. In this gentler, though still haunted, branch of history, William Afton staggers free of the suit, still human, still mortal, and now more afraid than he has been since the first time he killed. The children's spirits react with a different kind of horror. They are confused, enraged, their forms flickering with the urge to tear and claw, yet they cannot touch him, cannot force the timeline back onto its old rails. They can only watch as he backs toward a side door, slips through it, and disappears into the larger maze of the building, leaving the empty spring bonnie shell lying open on the floor like a discarded skin. From this point onward, we are walking a different path, step by step. All the same quiet tragedies still stain the rooms of Freddy's. All the same names etched into missing posters are all the same rumors whispered in the quiet hours of closing time. But there is no springtrap waiting for Fazbear's Fright to unearth years later. No green, rotting rabbit to anchor the legend. Instead, there is only a living man, out in the world, carrying his legacy of harm forward in secret. And as we follow this altered timeline, we have to ask, if the monster never dies in that room, what shape does his story take next? A killer on the run, William Afton without a metal tomb. So we stay with that image for a moment. No metal tomb, no sealed rabbit coffin. Only William Afton stepping back out into the hallway. He stumbles from the back room, clothes damp from the failed springlock test, skin pinched and bruised where metal nearly closed on bone, breathing in short, our ragged pulls as the echoes of laughter and static still ring in his ears. He is alive, but he has felt, more clearly than ever, how close the restless spirits have come. The air around him feels heavier now, as if the building itself is watching. We can imagine him pausing under the flickering fluorescence, listening to the distant clank of an animatronic moving when no one has wound it, feeling that cold, invisible pressure of eyes that no longer belong to living children. They do not drag him into a suit tonight, but their attention sharpens, and he understands that every step he takes inside these haunted shadows is a step on borrowed time. From here, his calculations change. Instead of dying in that room, he walks back through the maintenance corridors and quietly begins to erase himself, using the same knowledge that once let him build these places. Employee files can burn in a small, controlled office fire. Security tapes can be magnetically wiped. Afton Robotics can be folded into shell companies, its ownership drifting slowly through paperwork that no one at Fazbear quite understands. One identity can disappear, and another can surface 3 towns over, with a new address and a new set of forged records. He knows the weak spots in Fazbear's infrastructure, the back doors in payroll systems, the unreported storerooms where old chutes are left to rot. While Henry worries about closures and lawsuits, William is already planning which documents to vanish, which signatures to falsify, and which witnesses to quietly discredit, step by step. To the public, he becomes a rumor of a disgraced technician or a businessman who left after the tragedies. On paper, he simply fades from the timeline. Yet his motives are not only fear. The brush with death and the clear, focused hatred of the ghosts deepen his obsession with remnant and immortality. He has seen that agony can cling, that consciousness can linger in metal and fabric, and he convinces himself that if he works from the shadows rather than the spotlight, he can continue his experiments without interruption. A public figure can be questioned. A vanished man can work quietly in rented warehouses and underground labs. The children, however, are not free to follow. Their spirits remain bound to the animatronics and to the locations where their lives ended, pacing those tiled floors in endless loops. The restaurants become their cages, and their weapons are haunted traps that lure in new night guards, while William becomes something different out here in the wider world. Not a monster in the vents, but a human phantom, a name that never appears on any current lease. And this living Afton casts a longer, subtler shadow. Years later, when someone assembles Fazbear's Fright from discarded props and rumours, there is no Springtrap in the back room, only stories and maybe a few misfiled blueprints. Michael's long, weary search becomes a chase after a father who always seems to have left one town earlier, one facility ago. Henry's final plans will have to account not for a single trapped creature to burn, but for a man who has already learned how to slip every net, turning the end of this history into something that feels less like a final confrontation and more like a lingering, an unanswered question we can feel in the quiet hours to come. Fazbear's Fright without Springtrap, a museum of echoes, and so, when we open our eyes again, we find that unanswered question echoing into a different kind of future, one where the story reaches Fazbear's Fright without a body in a wall, without a rabbit of rotting metal waiting in the dark. Instead, we drift slowly toward a building on the edge of town, thrown together with plywood, second-hand fog machines, and whatever relics of this haunted history the owners can quietly pry loose from storage. Fazbear's Fright, in this timeline, is even more low budget than we remember, yet carefully staged, every corner arranged to suggest that something terrible once happened here. Old party room posters peel on the walls, a cracked Freddy head slumps on a shelf, and tangled wires hang like cobwebs above a fake security office. They raid shuttered locations, back rooms and auction lots, gathering masks, spare endoskeleton parts, and faded employee-only signs, trying to turn quiet tragedies into ticket sales. When the crew breaks through old drywall at one forgotten site, there is no sealed chamber holding a green, wheezing monster. There are only dusty suits on rusting hooks, a spring Bonnie costume collapsed in on itself like a shed skin, and stacks of training tapes and memos left where managers once hurriedly abandoned them. The documents hint at something darker than simple safety violations, but there is no corpse, no conclusive evidence, just a paper trail that dissolves into shadows. So the attraction opens anyway. And as we step by step into this version of FNAF 3, the gameplay shifts in tone. You, as the night guard, still sit in the flickering glow of cameras and vents, still use audio lures and reboot systems in the quiet hours. But the threats that close in are almost entirely phantoms, restless spirits surfacing through failing circuitry and frayed nerves. Burned versions of Chica, Foxy, Freddy and Balloon Boy flash across monitors and doorways, not as reflections of a physical killer stalking the halls, but as manifestations of children who were never truly laid to rest. William's presence here becomes archival rather than physical. His voice crackles through the training tapes, cheerfully explaining springlock procedures and mascot protocols, while we listen, knowing the tragedy those words once framed. Grainy photos on the walls show a man in a rabbit suit at long-forgotten parties, and urban legends whispered by staff fill in the gaps, turning him into a half-remembered myth instead of a shambling, inescapable figure. The attraction is built on his legacy, yet he never sets foot inside. Somewhere far away, the real William Afton may still be alive, watching a brief news segment about Fazbear's Fright flicker across a late-night television. Perhaps he feels a twisted satisfaction that his tangled web of crimes has become a haunted attraction, or a cold dread that his story is being told while his body has never been found. Either way, he remains out there in the dark, a living question mark the timeline has not yet answered. waiting for the next attempt to burn this history clean. Phantoms and fire. Do the ghosts need Springtrap to burn? And so, while William lingers somewhere beyond the camera frame, and the attraction built on his legacy moves toward its own ending, night after night at Fazbear's Fright, we watch the place unravel in the quiet hours, systems flickering, alarms chirping, and phantom shapes blooming out of the darkness like memories that refuse to stay buried. There is no hulking green corpse rabbit pacing the halls now, but the air still feels wrong. You sit in the security office and the monitors crackle, and every so often, in the haunted shadows of the grainy feeds, something flashes into being and then is gone. A burned-out Freddy face at the window, a foxy silhouette lunging down the hall, a puppet mask drifting slowly across the glass. They are not solid, not metal and bolts, but echoes of restless spirits tangled up in old photographs, wires, and display pieces dragged in from forgotten basements. Step by step, the attraction itself begins to feel less like a business venture and more like a building that wants to end. Audio lures misfire, ventilation systems choke, sprinklers fail their tests, and the staff write it off as faulty wiring and cheap construction, while we, following this alternate timeline, can feel something more deliberate pressing at the seams. The past is pushing back. The quiet tragedies that stock the gift shop and line the walls as props are not content to be scenery. Eventually, the fire still comes. Whether it starts with a frayed cable in a wall, a tipped-over space heater, or a quiet act of human sabotage from someone who has seen too much, the result is the same. Fazbear's Fright goes up in flames. Wood, plastic, and foam props melt and collapse. Old animatronic shells blacken and split. Framed articles curl into ash. The entire curated history of Freddy's, gathered under one roof, becomes a single orange blur against the night sky. Without Springtrap sealed in some back room, though, the blaze accomplishes something different. It scorches the relics that anchored certain ghosts, scatters the remnants of masks and hands and stage pieces that held their grief, and maybe weakens a few of the echoes bound to those specific items. But it does not cremate William's body, because his body was never there. Somewhere beyond the firelight, the man who started all of this is still breathing. For the spirits, if we imagine their perspective, this must feel like yet another missed verdict, another restaurant, another warehouse, another attraction burned to the ground, while their true killer walks free in the quiet, outside world, untouched by smoke or sirens. The fire looks like justice from the street, but inside the larger story, it is only a reset, another stage wiped clean. And so, we are left with a gentle, unsettling question lingering over the ruins. Without a physical Springtrap to trap and incinerate, can any fire really end this story? Or does the horror simply change shape, slipping into rumors, case files, and digital traces, waiting for the next place to surface? Perhaps in a world of tapes, code, and headsets where flames cannot reach at all. Michael's mission, rewritten, hunting a man, not a monster. So in this quieter branch of the timeline, after the flames of Fazbear's Fright die down, and the attraction is reduced to ash and twisted metal, we find Michael again, standing in the haunted shadows of his family's legacy, without a rabbit-shaped corpse to point to, without a charred monster to say, "There, that's him." He walks away carrying the same weight we know from the main story. Sister locations' underground horrors, the closed pizzerias, the knowledge that his father is the unseen author of so many quiet tragedies. in the familiar version of events, our minds drifting slowly through that history. Michael's path bends toward a very physical destination, toward a rotting spring bonnie shell at Fazbear's Fright, a single place where the guilt and remnant and hatred have been compressed into Springtrap. Here, though, as we let the tale wash over us, there is no suit in a back room, no fixed point to aim at. Instead, Michael is left with paper, with rumour, with the thin, rustling trail a man leaves when he vanishes, but never really stops moving. And we can picture him in some dim apartment, the blinds half closed, the glow of an old CRT or office monitor spilling across stacks of documents, poring over purchase orders, insurance claims, shuttered company filings, anything that still bears the Afton name. Step by step, he learns to hunt through corporate records instead of hallways, tracing shell companies tied to Circus Baby's entertainment and rental, cross-referencing addresses with police reports and missing children's notices, following a killer who has become a set of signatures and P.O. boxes rather than a shambling animatronic. From Fazbear's Fright, he salvages what he can. Not a body, but tapes. Training recordings, safety briefings, or promotional reels, all copied from older locations and sent to the attraction as props. Late in the quiet hours, he listens to them on loop, his father's voice drifting slowly through crackling speakers, calm and instructional as it describes spring lock procedures, emergency protocols, and acceptable risk. Michael rewinds, pauses, hunts for stray comments, for a mention of a private facility, a partner, a research site, trying to hear not just the words, but the gaps where a man like William might have hidden his true work. This shifts Michael's purpose in a subtle, chilling way. He is no longer a son trying to destroy a single cursed body, no longer hoping that if he can just trap Springtrap in one last fire, the restless spirits will finally sleep. Instead, he is chasing a human being who might still be out there, aging but active, quietly refining remnant experiments in some forgotten warehouse, are far from animatronic stages and security cameras. And because the enemy is more elusive and more human, the shape of the end must change as well. Henry, watching the same rumors and records, will eventually understand that they cannot simply build a maze for a rabbit-shaped corpse and wait. They will need a different kind of lure, a different kind of final stage, something that tempts William the strategist, rather than William the trapped animal. That new design, that careful invitation to a man who still believes he controls the game, waits for us a little further down the timeline, where fire will be laid not for a monster of metal, but for the man who never stopped walking away from the flames. Henry's lament, planning a final fire without Springtrap. So in this quieter branch of the story, we drift slowly away from the image we know so well. No rotting rabbit sealed behind a forgotten wall. No Springtrap pacing through a horror attraction built on ashes and old props. Instead, we move forward with a man who never stopped walking, and with another man who has spent decades watching those footsteps in the haunted shadows of his own conscience. Henry Emily grows old in that watching. By the time we reach the era of the pizzeria simulator, Henry is not the bright young engineer of the 1970s anymore. He is older, shoulders a little lower, voice a little softer, carrying a history of quiet tragedies that have threaded through every restaurant, every birthday song, every missing poster. He has failed to protect his own child. He has failed to stop William. He has failed again and again, to free the restless spirits trapped in metal shells that he helped design. Yet under all that weariness, there is a steady, almost gentle resolve. The legacy of these creations must end, and the children must finally be allowed to rest. In the main timeline, his plan in what we call FN, AF6, is clear and cruelly elegant. He creates a place that will pull Springtrap, the puppet, Baby, and the others into one final stage, then drown them all in fire. But here, without Springtrap, the problem shifts. William is not a shambling corpse bound to a suit. He's a human being, still mobile, still clever, still able to vanish into the crowd. A trap for a monster of metal becomes a trap for a man who thinks he has outgrown consequences. So Henry's design adjusts, step by step. The pizzeria simulator is still a facade, a low-budget establishment that looks like another doomed Fazbear venture. Yet beneath the chipped paint and discount animatronics, he builds a maze of contingencies. The salvage room is not only a place to test haunted machines, it is a stage where a human intruder could be cornered. The vents and back halls become quiet channels, not just to funnel animatronics, but to guide a living killer toward a center point he believes he has chosen for himself. To lure William, Henry cannot rely on a simple attraction like Fazbear's Fright. Instead, he turns to subtler currents in the tangled web of rumors and documents that always seem to swirl around these places. Classified ads promise access to old tech and forgotten endoskeletons. Blueprints, circulated through shadowy collectors, hide little anomalies, symbols and notes only someone obsessed with Remnant would notice. Salvage instructions hint, between the lines, that something uniquely saturated with agony might be waiting in this new location. Henry trusts, in a quiet, bitter way, that William's curiosity and arrogance will do the rest. A man who has chased immortality through Remnant will not ignore whispers of a final, concentrated source. Whether he comes to harvest, to sabotage, or simply to gloat, Henry plans for a night when human footsteps and animatronic claws share the same floor. And so the fire still waits at the end of this timeline, banked like coals in the quiet hours before dawn. But now its target is less certain. A building filled with haunted machines, a possible human killer moving through the smoke, and a lingering question hanging over the flames like a dream you cannot quite finish. Can one blaze truly catch them all? Or will something once again slip out into the shadows beyond the light? Scraps and remnants, salvaging without scrap trap. So we follow that question into the fire, and we find ourselves in a different kind of room entirely, far from the roaring blaze and the collapsing rafters, back in the quiet hours where this ending is carefully prepared. A bare office, a metal folding chair, a tape recorder on the desk, and beyond the glass, a concrete space with only a single spotlight and a single broken figure waiting in the center. This is where the salvage knights live, drifting slowly between paperwork and interrogation, between routine and ritual. You sit in that chair, and the game of it all is almost boring at first glance. A checklist, a clipboard, lines about motion and audio response, read in a steady voice. In front of you, under the harsh light, a battered animatronic slumps motionless, wires spilling like exposed veins, eyes dull and half-lidded. You press play on a cassette, you play a sound, you wait. The silence stretches, the shadows at the edge of the room feel heavier, and then sometimes there is the smallest twitch, a head tilt, a jaw adjustment, a reminder that these are not empty shells. In the main timeline, we expect one shape in particular to eventually occupy that chair-facing spotlight. The rotting rabbit, Scrap Trap, a mangled echo of Springtrap with a man still trapped inside. But in this branching history, In this gentler nightmare we are tracing step by step, and that decayed rabbit never arrives. The salvages still come. Molten Freddy's tangled web of wires and masks, Scrap Baby with her towering claw and glassy stare, Lefty carrying the puppet's quiet burden. Yet there is no Scrap Trap, no visible, shambling legacy of William himself. Even so, his absence does not feel clean. We can imagine that before he vanished from the public eye, William had time to tamper with code, to lace certain endoskeletons with remnant-infused parts, to seed the world with restless spirits that still answer, in some distant way, to his hidden will. Perhaps he nudged Molten Freddy toward this final location through glitched pathfinding, or ensured that Baby's new body would always be drawn back toward the stage where children once laughed and then disappeared into haunted shadows. Henry's plan, on the surface, is about gathering them. The amalgam of fun-time remnants in Molten Freddy, the puppet inside Lefty, Elizabeth's grief and anger within Scrap Baby, all these quiet tragedies converging in one plain room behind a pizzeria's smiling facade. When you read from that checklist, when you listen for movement in the dark between cassette tones, you are, in a way, interviewing a crowd of lost voices, Charlie, Elizabeth, unnamed children from long-closed locations, while the man who started it all remains physically elsewhere, maybe alive, maybe already claimed by some other fate. It leaves us with a gentle but unsettling question. If William never becomes Springtrap, if no Scrap Trap ever sits under that light, is Henry's trap incomplete? Or was it never truly about catching the killer at all? Perhaps the fire is only meant to release the children, to burn away the machinery that chained them here, while justice for William is deferred to something beyond fire, beyond metal, beyond any checklist we can hold in our hands. And if that is true, then as the last salvage is logged and the final animatronic is lured inside, we have to wonder what or who might still be moving freely outside these walls, waiting to write the next chapter of this timeline in the dark. The fire that misses, a FNAF 6, ending without Afton's corpse. So the stage is set, the blueprints are followed, and the building is dressed in relics and regrets. But as we drift further into this altered history, something crucial is missing from the center of the trap we've been quietly assembling. The final night arrives. The guests are gone. The quiet hours settle over the pizzeria like a blanket, and somewhere in the control room, Henry Emily decides that this is the moment when everything must finally burn. One by one, the doors seal with a heavy, echoing finality, turning exits into walls and hallways into corridors of no return. The ventilation shutters slide shut, the security locks engage, and when the fire systems are quietly overridden, the sprinklers fail to answer the emergency they were built for. Small tongues of flame begin at the edges, in the wiring, in the carefully placed accelerants, and then, drifting slowly along the walls and ceilings, they grow, casting long shadows over tables, posters, and the broken faces of salvaged animatronics. Over the speakers, Henry's recorded voice plays, calm but weighted with years of quiet tragedies. He addresses the children first, and the innocent ones whose restless spirits have been bound to metal and wire for what feels like a lifetime. He apologizes for not stopping this sooner, for building the stage on which their suffering played out, for every decision that let William's cruelty hide inside smiling mascots. He admits that his own hands helped weave this tangled web of attractions and accidents, that his legacy is not just of singing robots, but of haunted shadows and empty chairs at family tables. He explains gently but firmly that this fire is not revenge, but release, It is meant to unmake the cages he built, to separate soul from steel, to give the puppet's vessel, molten Freddy's swirling mass of faces, and Scrap Baby's twisted form a final cleansing end. As the flames intensify, their shells crack and warp. The remnant inside them heated, scattered, are thinned out into something that can no longer hold them here. And for the first time in this long timeline, the children are given a real chance to move on. Yet, in this version of events, as we let the tale wash over us, there is a strange absence in the firelight. There is no Springtrap thrashing in the corner, no Scrap Trap collapsing into embers, no human corpse fused to green, rotting metal. William's body is not here. His screams do not join the chorus. The trap has sprung, but the man it was most meant for is already outside its reach. So the pizzeria falls, plank by plank, beam by beam, until only a smouldering crater and drifting ash remain. And Henry's plan, step by step, has freed everyone except the one who started it all. The children are quiet now. The buildings are gone. The restless spirits have slipped beyond our view, but somewhere beyond the edge of these ashes, an older man may still be breathing, alone with memories that no fire can erase, haunted in a different way, and not nearly as finished as we would like to believe. Afton in the aftermath. Does a human monster ever truly rest? So we follow him now, not as a screaming thing in a burning maze, but as a man stepping quietly off the edge of the official record, drifting slowly into the blank spaces of this timeline where police reports end and rumor begins. The cameras are gone, the headlines have faded, and in their place we find William Afton in the unremarkable light of ordinary mornings, carrying groceries, locking doors, walking home from a job that no one would ever think to fear. He cannot stay anywhere long. A different state, a different town, a different name on the mailbox and on the payroll, while he moves between low-profile technical work that lets him stay near tools, wires, and old circuit boards. He fixes vending machines in a strip mall, repairs coin-operated rides outside supermarkets, troubleshoots cheap animatronics for seasonal stores, always close enough to familiar machinery, but never close enough to a spotlight that might connect him to Fazbear's haunted shadows and the quiet tragedies that once played out under coloured stage lights. Inside, though, he is never really far from those rooms. The memory of the spring-lock suit closing in on him, of metal teeth brushing his throat, lives beside the images of fires consuming his creations and the empty spaces where his children should be. Nights stretch long. He wakes to the imagined sound of distant music boxes and children's laughter cut short, replaying each loss while still clinging, stubbornly, to his theories about remnant, about survival, about pain crystallized into something that refuses to die. Without the resources of a company, his work shrinks, but it does not stop. In rented garages and cramped basements, he assembles makeshift labs from stolen parts and discarded equipment, soldering by the light of a single hanging bulb. There are no grand pizzerias now, no elaborate underground facilities, only small-scale experiments carried out in the quiet hours. Test rigs hidden behind false walls, crude devices meant to capture heat and measure the strange residue he believes still lingers in certain metals and certain memories. At some point, almost without us noticing, the man who once strode through crowded dining rooms becomes an old figure in a worn coat, shoulders bent, hands shaking slightly as he writes. The notes pile higher than the successes. Diagrams of circuits that never quite worked. Formulas for remnant extraction crossed out and rewritten. timelines of incidents that only he remembers in such obsessive detail. And when his end finally comes, it may be in a rented room above a closed-down shop, or on a thin mattress beside a table of failed devices, his breath fading in the dark with no animatronic witness and no raging fire. No one recognizes the body. The name on his ID is just another alias, and the coroner sees only an elderly technician who died alone. His papers are boxed, misplaced, maybe scanned into some forgotten archive. His equipment is sold for scrap. There is no springtrap on display at Fazbear's Fright. No dramatic confrontation to point to and say, "Here, this is where he was ended." Instead, his legacy disperses into questions, rumors, and digital ghosts, a tangled web of half-remembered stories and corrupted files that outlive the man himself, as we move on to the later years of this history and watch how the world tries to close a door on a monster it never officially caught. Digital hauntings. Glitch trap without a corpse to echo. So when we last left this timeline, there was no ruined rabbit in a burned-out horror maze. No springtrap emerging from the smoke. Only rumors and corrupted stories drifting slowly through message boards and late-night conversations. In that quiet absence, something different begins to take shape. Not in a forgotten back room, but inside lines of code and archived recordings, as Fazbear Entertainment tries, once again, to manage its legacy instead of truly facing it. Years later, in an era of sleek headsets and home consoles, the company commissions a virtual reality experience, a glossy PR project designed to clean up its history and turn quiet tragedies into marketable nostalgia. To build it, developers are given access to everything that still exists. Scanned assets from old locations, security logs, design documents, voice lines, maintenance programs, even training tapes made for technicians and managers who once walked those haunted shadows in person. Buried in that data, like splinters, are things created by or about William Afton himself. In the main version of the story, we often talk about Glitchtrap as a digital echo of William, a fragment of his consciousness that somehow rode along with salvaged code, a restless presence pressing against the glass of the simulation, looking for a way out. Here, that idea remains, but it no longer has to cling to the image of a rotting corpse in a spring-lock suit. Instead, we imagine a different path, where the echo comes from words and choices, not from metal and bone. For decades, William's work left traces, audio logs where he discussed animatronic behavior, prototype software for pathfinding and facial recognition, private experiments in emulating human decision-making. All of that could have been recorded, digitized, and backed up long before any spring-lock incident that, in this branch of the timeline, never takes place. When those files are scraped, compressed, and reassembled for help wanted, the patterns of his voice and his decisions might quietly reconstitute themselves like a ghost emerging from overlapping reflections. And because William never vanishes inside a suit, there is another, more deliberate possibility. While he is still alive, still watching the company from a distance, he might begin to plan for a different kind of survival, exploring ways to seed code with pieces of his mind, a careful, methodical attempt at a digital afterlife that does not depend on what happens to his body. Step by step, test by test, he could train an algorithm on his own speech, his own preferences, his own cruel problem-solving, until the boundary between tool and self begins to blur. By the time the VR project is underway, what the developers mistake for legacy code may in fact be a waiting copy, a gentle smile in the dark, to wearing a rabbit costume of ones and zeros. In this quieter universe, Glitchtrap is less a ghost clinging to a corpse and more a backup of a living man, a calculated insurance policy that persists even if William Afton dies quietly somewhere off-screen. As we move forward into the era where digital hauntings start to spill out of the headset and into the waking world. Cassette men and hidden files. How the past bleeds into VR. And so, as that gentle rabbit of code smiles from behind the pixels, we follow the trail back to where it all quietly began. In a modern office, under fluorescent lights, with tired developers and aging hardware humming on a table. There is no haunted attraction here, no smoking ruin of Fazbear's Fright. There is only a team told to make a nostalgic VR experience. I am to scan what remains of a company's history and turn it into a marketable dream. Step by step, they do exactly that. Old circuit boards from long closed locations are pulled from storage. Training tapes are fed into digitizers, and legacy software from decades of Fazbear systems is copied, line by line, into fresh repositories. To them, these are just assets and reference material, a way to rebuild the past in high resolution. But as we're drifting slowly through this timeline, we know that Fazbear's past is never just props and code. In those quiet hours of data migration, haunted shadows move in the background. Among the files, the cassette man's recordings return. Henry's measured voice narrating safety procedures, ethical warnings, and contingency plans that were never fully followed. His words become part of the VR project's spine, a quiet conscience embedded in the build. Yet, sharing the same folders and archives, there can also be traces of William's voice, fragments of old training modules he recorded, design notes spoken into cheap microphones, and experimental software routines he authored, when he was still an engineer first and a murderer second. These two men, who once shared a company, now share disk space. Henry's careful instructions about decommissioning dangerous suits can sit only a few directories away from William's private test programs. Little tools meant to monitor animatronic behavior, log emotional responses, or, in the later years, interface with Remnant itself. In this quieter universe, their legacies overlap not in a burning pizzeria, but in a tangled web of file names and version numbers. If William was researching how to track, store, or manipulate consciousness through Remnant, then somewhere in that pile of legacy code, there may be routines designed for exactly that purpose. A demon that never stops listening, a process that tags and copies patterns of behavior, a failsafe that backs up user profiles in ways no one else quite understands. When the developers import everything wholesale, those programs come along too, slipping into the VR environment as invisible scaffolding, giving Glitchtrap a foothold without anyone realizing that the game itself is now watching back. None of this requires Springtrap's twisted frame or a corpse sealed into a wall. The data that matters comes from William's years behind terminals and drafting tables, from his quiet nights writing tools for animatronics and for himself. His digital shadow is born not from a ruined suit, but from backups and logs, from forgotten prototypes that never got wiped. And as this shadow settles into help wanted, the question we carry forward changes. We stop wondering where William's body went, and begin to wonder how far his reflection can spread, and who, in the neon malls of the future, might already be carrying him in their pocket without knowing. Security breach. Reimagined. A mall without burn trap. And so, when we surface again, we surface in neon. The mega Pizzaplex rises like a dream of the old restaurants, stretched upward into glass and steel, a towering mall of music and lights where Freddy Fazbear's has been reborn as an entire ecosystem. There are stages and catwalks, glittering atriums and mirrored floors, arcades that never quite sleep, and all of it bathed in shifting color that hides the older history beneath. And under that polished shell, beneath the food courts and photo booths, a second world waits in the shadows. Maintenance corridors, service elevators, and quiet tunnels where the walls still remember earlier tragedies. Here, the glam rock animatronics rule the night, their designs louder and sleeker, their personalities turned toward spectacle and brand loyalty, while somewhere in their code, the restless spirits of the franchise's past seem to echo without ever fully appearing. We follow Gregory, a runaway child with no file and no guardian, waking alone inside this mechanical cathedral after closing time. His first ally is the last one you would expect, Glamrock Freddy, gentle where the others are hostile, glitching and confused, aren't yet still reaching out to protect an innocent stranger he should only see as a guest profile. Their partnership becomes a slow, tense journey through the building, step by step, as we drift with them from the main stage to the back hallways, from phaser blast arenas to forgotten party rooms, always one room ahead of animatronics that hunt instead of entertain. We watch them squeeze through vents, slip past security bots, and descend into staff-only zones that feel more like an archive of mistakes than a place of business. In these quiet hours, the Pizzaplex feels less like a mall and more like a living record of everything Fazbear has tried not to learn. In the main timeline, we know that journey eventually leads down, past the glossy facade and into a buried ruin, to a chamber where Burntrap waits, yet another body for William, unfused into a charred rabbit shell, still refusing to die. But in this reimagined branch of the timeline, there is no such figure lurking in the dark, no green corpse suit on a throne of wires, no physical monster rising from the rubble to be punched apart one more time. Instead, the final confrontation becomes something quieter and stranger. The threat is in the network, in corrupted AI routines that stutter William's old phrases, in glitch trap-like fragments that flicker across staff terminals and arcade cabinets, in environmental hazards left behind by decades of cursed engineering. Doors misread clearance and slam shut. Stage lifts drop at the wrong moment. Holograms loop into pleading faces that should not be there. We are not fighting a man anymore. We are wrestling with his reflection inside the building itself. Gregory and Freddy still stand against the legacy of William Afton. But now that legacy is code and recorded laughter, safety posters and design choices, a haunted shadowscape woven through every subsystem. There are no bones to burn, only servers to shut down, logs to erase, and choices to walk away from. As we let the tale wash over you, the question shifts again. If the villain survives only as data, can you ever be certain you really pulled the plug? Or did you just push him one layer deeper into the system, waiting for the next child to log in? Echoes in the circuits, Afton's legacy as pure data, and in that one quiet shift of perspective, everything in the Pizzaplex begins to look different. If we accept that William Afton never became Springtrap, never rotted behind a wall, and then the threat we are facing in this era is not a single limping monster, but a library of decisions and routines, drifting slowly through servers and backup drives. The villain is not in the vents. He is in the version history. Fazbear Entertainment survives fires, lawsuits, and shuttered locations, yet its habits remain the same. Reuse, recycle, reskin. Old pathfinding code from the early Freddy's days gets wrapped in a glossy glamrock interface. Legacy security subroutines, once written to track innocent children for safety, are quietly ported into modern surveillance software. Step by step, the company carries forward the invisible architecture Afton helped design, even as it paints over his name and files away his crimes as distant tragedy. So when we watch the glam rock animatronics in the Pizzaplex, and their strange priorities feel less random, Monty's sudden aggression, Roxy's obsessive need for validation, Freddy's glitches and blackouts that arrive at the worst possible moments, all of these can be read as downstream echoes of older control structures, subtle biases baked into decision trees, inherited from a man who treated empathy as a variable to be minimized. On the surface, they dance and perform. Underneath, in the haunted shadows of their code, they still weigh human life against performance metrics in ways that feel disturbingly familiar. In this version of the timeline, Glitchtrap, or something very much like him, does not need a corpse to cling to. He is not the ghost of a ruined suit, but a self-propagating pattern, a composite of Afton's digital fingerprints, a logging function he wrote that never quite shuts off, a test routine that keeps trying to optimize fear responses, a hidden flag that marks certain users as preferred. Spread across arcade cabinets, VR headsets, and maintenance terminals, this entity becomes a restless script rather than a restless spirit, slipping quietly from node to node whenever someone forgets to pull a plug. That makes Afton's legacy less about one monstrous rabbit and more about a distributed infection of ideas. You cannot burn it in a single fire or trap it in one basement attraction, because it lives wherever those old libraries are linked, wherever a harried developer clicks import instead of starting fresh. It is a tangled web of dependencies, a quiet tragedy of convenience and denial. There is an unsettling calm in that realization. Even without Springtrap stalking the halls, the story of William Afton continues in every line of corrupted code, in every animatronic that pauses just a little too long before helping a child. As we let the tale wash over you, we move toward a future where the question is no longer how to destroy his body, but whether anyone at Fazbear will ever choose to sever that legacy in the code itself, or if they will keep building higher on a haunted foundation, one glossy attraction at a time. The children's justice deferred. Can the souls ever reach Afton? And in that haunted foundation, there is one more quiet tragedy we have to sit with for a while, drifting slowly through the spaces it leaves behind. Because beneath the remnant experiments and the corrupted code, this timeline is still built on something painfully simple. Innocent children, lured away by a man in a rabbit suit and taken into back rooms and never brought home again. Their names are lost to police reports and whispered rumors, but their presence lingers in every stage light and every darkened hallway. Step by step, we watch them move from frightened victims to restless spirits, bound to metal shells that were meant to entertain. In the glow of the showtime lights, they twitch and stare, and in the quiet hours, when the last parent has left and the last birthday song has faded, they search. They search for the man who smiled at them, who promised fun and prizes, who closed the door and never opened it again. In the main timeline, that search eventually finds its answer in the same kind of suit he once wore. There, Springtrap becomes a kind of brutal poetry. William Afton, cornered by the echoes of the children he dismantled, He scrambles into the old spring bonnie shell, and the failed spring logs bite down, grinding metal into flesh. His body rots, his spirit festers, and decades later, he staggers through Fazbear's Fright, a walking confession of everything he did. The children's anger and agony help drive the fires that consume him again and again, until even his stubborn refusal to die is dragged into the flames. But in this quieter branch of the timeline, he never climbs into that suit. There is no sickly green rabbit waiting behind a wall, no single ruined body for the ghost to surround. The children still haunt the stages and back rooms. They still flicker in cameras and bleed into the circuitry of newer models. Their presence can topple franchises, burn buildings to the ground, and even leak into games and training tapes. Yet they never get to lay spectral hands on William himself. Their murderer remains a fading figure in security footage, a shadow in police files, a man who may have died in bed with no one watching. So their justice stretches outward, more diffuse, like smoke through vents. They turn every new Fazbear venture into a cursed endeavor, scaring away customers with glitches and sightings, pushing employees to quit, nudging curious investigators toward the truth. Rumors spread, documentaries are pitched, urban legends bloom, and the company's legacy is quietly poisoned from within. In this way, the children expose what happened, not by confronting his body, but by making sure the dream he sold can never stand without shaking. And still, as we let the tale wash over you, and a question lingers in the haunted shadows of this history, is that enough? Or does a story where the killer slips away off stage leave a wound that never quite closes, pointing us toward a final revelation we haven't reached yet? Michael's endless walk, a son without a final confrontation. So we follow that lingering question into one of the quietest tragedies in this altered timeline, and we find Michael Afton, still walking, still breathing, still moving step by step through the ruins his family left behind. He is not a heroic avenger, not a knight facing a dragon in a burned-out attraction, but a tired man who has already lost almost everything, and who now has no clear place to lay the last of his grief down. When we look back over Michael's history, drifting slowly through the years, it reads like a catalogue of wounds. The bite of 83, where his childish cruelty and his father's technology combined to crush his little brother's skull. Elizabeth's death at Circus Babies, an innocent sister swallowed by a machine their father built, while Michael stood outside that tragedy, helpless and ignorant. His own hollowing as Enard climbed inside his body and wore him like a suit, leaving him to decay and yet continue, kept upright by remnant and regret. Night after night in haunted pizzerias, in dingy offices lit by flickering monitors, in underground labs where the walls remembered screams. In the main timeline, all of that pain seems to narrow toward a single, terrible point. William Afton becomes Springtrap, a murderer fused with rust and wire, and Michael's wandering leads him sooner or later to that monstrous form. He helps lure his father to Fazbear's Fright, participates in the final blaze of the FNAF 6 fire, and we are invited to imagine that in those flames, something like closure is born, a confrontation, a confession, a last act of putting a monster to rest. But here, without Springtrap, that anchor is gone. There is no rotting rabbit in a back room, no guaranteed body to burn. Instead, Michael keeps searching long after the known fires have cooled. He visits abandoned sites that were never catalogued, walks through empty dining rooms where paint peels in long, curling strips, and listens in the quiet hours for any rumor of a strange engineer, a reclusive technician, a man who understands animatronics a little too well. Corporate records become his bedtime reading. Shell companies and quiet acquisitions trace a faint yet haunted shadow across the business world, and he follows it as far as he can. Then comes the pattern interrupt in his life. Nothing. No headline, no arrest, no confirmed death. Just a trail that thins out into half-remembered sightings and unmarked paperwork. Perhaps William died anonymously in a rented room, his body claimed by no one, or perhaps he slipped into another name and another town, leaving his legacy to echo without him. Michael never knows. The emotional toll of that uncertainty is its own kind of haunting. Without a burned suit or a documented grave, his hatred has nowhere solid to land, and his guilt has no final conversation to plead for forgiveness. He becomes, in a way, a wandering ghost himself, a man technically alive, yet moving like one of the restless spirits he once tried to free, unpacing through the tangled web of his family's history. In this version of the story, Michael's arc does not close. It just fades, gently, into distance. We can picture him as an older figure, shoulders bent,